Hi folks, my name is Flannerectomy and welcome to a quick and dirty tutorial on occlusion geometry in the Spark editor for Natural Selection 2. As you can see, we're in the editor right now and we're looking at nanogrid in Fail, and I'm going to show you what occlusion geometry is and how it works. So let's start with that first question. What is occlusion geometry? Occlusion geometry is basically a shell around your map that prevents the engine from rendering rooms that are behind those walls. So let's say we have this back wall here. There is a shell around it, which you can see here. Just turn off the light there. There's a shell behind the map that prevents you from rendering Marine Start. That's to the north of here, for instance. I can turn off these layers and just show you that this is the actual box that houses nanogrid. And the two entrances from the south and the vents over there. And here we are in game, looking at nanogrid again. At the top left, you'll see that I entered r_stats in my console. It's this line. Now I turn it off. Now I turn it on. My frame rate is pretty low because of the recording right now, but the fourth line there is important. The draw calls. It says that there are 1142 draw calls right now, and that's how much the engine is drawing at the moment. Now I've entered r_wireframe in console, and you can actually see the wireframe of the map. And you can see that Marine Start in the distance isn't being rendered. So it's just this room and some of the rooms that we're looking into. And that's all because of the occlusion geometry. If there were no occlusion geometry in this map, pretty much everything would be rendered and the draw calls would go through the roof. And here we are in a edited version of Veil that I made where I deleted all the occlusion geometry. And you can see in the top left, my frame rate has dropped to 10 to 20, and the draw calls have shut up to 5,300, and that's just looking in the direction of Marine Start. Now, if I turn around, and this is going to hurt because I'm also recording, wow, it's really difficult. You can see the draw calls go up to 8,000, 9,000. Oh, my frame rate is 3. Oh, 10,000. The frame rate that dipped to 3. So yeah, that's, looks like I didn't just delete the occlusion geometry, but also a face here. No matter, it illustrates my point pretty well. No occlusion geometry means unplayable map as soon as your map is detailed. If it's a gray box map, if it's just an early map that you're making, early stage, you can get away with it. It'll start hurting once structures are dropped, once players are running around the map, once cysts are everywhere. That it's going to hurt then. So you should always have, as soon as you can, build some basic occlusion geometry around your map, around your rooms. Here we are with r_wireframe entered in the console, and you can see through the wall, Marine Start is being rendered, skylights over there, all these rooms, all these other areas of the map are all being rendered, explaining the draw calls of 10,000. Now, before I actually start building occlusion geometry in an example for you, I want to show you this. This is a small test chamber I made with a couple of props behind this frame here. This frame houses occlusion geometry. You can see here that there is a group called occlusion geometry. Let me just unselect everything. If I hit that, this face will be selected. That's because I assigned this face to be part of the group occlusion geometry, and that's how it works. That's all there's to it. You build faces, you assign them to this group. So let's unassign it. If I now click on occlusion geometry, oh well, let's unassign it entirely first. If I now click on occlusion geometry, you'll see there's nothing selected here. And if I just select this face, hit plus, well, occlusion geometry is selected. It is now occlusion geometry. So I'll always make a separate layer for my occlusion geometry so I can toggle it off if I don't want to see it. Alright, here we are in game, and as you can see there's an empty frame because well, occlusion geometry of course isn't rendered. You don't see anything. It doesn't matter what texture you put on it, you're not going to see it. And the only thing we see is the dropship, because the dropship is big enough to stick out from behind my face of occlusion geometry. So if I start moving to the left, the next thing appears, and the next, and the next. So you'll also notice that the back wall, the geometry, also disappears, and there's some sort of chunk thing going on where it's not actually just that one face, because the back wall is just simply one face, but it's actually hacked into two pieces by the engine. And if I'm close enough, then everything will disappear. Even the light disappears. And if I move through it, because you can move through occlusion geometry, everything appears again. That's basically how it works. Here we have a little test room that I will be building the occlusion geometry around. If you were to stand here, then without occlusion geometry, all of this would be rendered. This would all be rendered, as we'd seen before in my hack job of fail. So let's get to building some occlusion geometry. Now, the easiest, or like the first idea you'd probably have is just make a box slightly bigger than this room, put it around the room. The same thing for the corridor, connect the two, things like that. That is a good way of doing it, but it also takes a long time. The only thing you want to block is line of sight to other rooms. You're going to be standing here, you're not going to be standing on top of this chamber or far below it. So you don't really need to do with ceilings and floors for your occlusion geometry. You only really need a very tall wall. So I'm just going to move this to the side. It's a nice face with no extra vertices. It's just 4 lines, 4 vertices, and 1 face. And we're going to go in side view, or front view actually. And I'm going to scale it up and down a bit. Let's stick this to a grid size. Here we are. So now I have 1 face outside of my room. And I'm just going to quickly texture this. Like, it doesn't really matter which texture you use, but I like to use the lava texture because it'll show up pretty well when you've got lights turned on in the editor. And I like to stick to my grid, make everything easier if you stick to grid. Let's zoom in there on that a bit. And I'm just going to put it 4 units outside my regular wall. I'm just going to stick to a 4 unit system here. So now I've got my large face here. It's 4 units to the left and right of this wall face, and what I'm going to do now is hit X for extrude and just extrude this face, and then move that face to over here. It's 4 units to the side of that, and now we move here, and voila, it's a new wall. We're going to do the same thing 2 more times to wrap this box entirely. You could just make a box and size it around it, but I find that this is a nice method. I can't speak. And it's pretty fast. You just make a wall, make a wall, make a wall. It's actually going a little slowish right now because I'm recording, but it should be fine. Make sure I'm touching it. Your occlusion geometry doesn't have to be welded together or anything. As long as the lines all touch perfectly, it'll be fine. So right now what we have is this doorway. Oh dear, a doorway. What now? Well, we'll just go here, make this 4 units bigger than the actual doorway, and extrude back just a little bit so we get the box, and park it 4 units outside and delete that face because you don't want occlusion geometry through anywhere you move. So right now we have, I'll just turn everything off and put myself in the right position. We've got this. It's very simple and very clear. Now we're gonna go to the next area. So I'm just gonna copy that face, put it 4 units over there. Let's see which viewport I should be in. Zoom in a bit so I can get it right. And 4 units outside, left and right. and then just start copying again. Or start extruding and moving, is what I mean to say. Voila. There's that face. Just keep going around and around and around until your whole map's enclosed. Of course, it's not just the outside of the map, it's also the insides, which you shouldn't neglect. Like the little negative space on the inside. We're just going to wrap this whole chamber, or this whole corridor I should say, and have it touch over there again. So right now I've got this all wrapped, and here's that face again because I just wrapped the whole thing with that. So I'll just make a new box inside, make it 4 units bigger than the doorway on each side again, and delete that face. And if I turn this off now, it's nice and wrapped. So if you've got more complex shapes already, like I'm making this basically for if you've just gray boxed your map, or if you are gray boxing your map, you should basically have simple shapes then. If you get more complex shapes, of course, you're going to have to figure out how to wrap it properly. Make sure it's tight. If you've got curves, like semi-circle here, or cylinder, it's going to make it a little more difficult for you to decide what to do, how tightly you want to wrap that. That's all up to you. This is just the quick and easy, dirty way of doing it. Just to get your map out there so you can test it, because people don't want to play maps that aren't that don't have occlusion geometry, because after a while, you know, it just slows down. It's no fun to play at all. Alright, so this corridor is done, and since these two rooms are identical, I can just copy this over, slide it out there. All I need to do now is take this doorway, and move it down. And there you have it. My whole map, this spectacularly large map, is now wrapped in geometry that I'm going to assign to occlusion geometry. Oh, I have to click that first, then add it to the level, to the group, I should say. I'm sorry, it's late. And there we have it. That's all there's to it. So let's have a look in game. And here we are in the map. This area is here. My frame rate is horrible because I am recording, of course, but draw calls, as you can see, are really low at the moment. So let's have a look at the wireframe. There's a ton of errors happening right now because I'm missing all sorts of entities that you need to have to run your game properly. And as you can see, I'm in here inside, and occasionally something will pop up, but the room next door is more or less gone. So if you get more complex shapes in your map, then you'll notice that nothing gets rendered. And the room next door, there's a couple faces still there because this is pretty close, but at least the props are not rendered. Players won't show up. All that stuff won't be rendered. And that wraps that up. I hope I explained things well enough for you to understand what the hell I just did. And hopefully it helps you building your map and getting it out there so people can play it.